Folks, we're live here at Muscatine Hy-Vee Market Grill Express. Brian Musell with Gary Dolphin, the voice of the Hawkeyes. And this is Breakfast with Dolph from 8 to 9. We'll be live. You can see this live streamed on the Voice of Muscatine Facebook page. And you can also listen live, which you are right now, on KWPC 860 AM and 95.1 FM in Muscatine. And I'm thrilled to have the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin, here today. Gary, welcome to Muscatine.
Brian, great to be here. Great to be back in Muscatine, and certainly at one of our great corporate citizens, not only for the state of Iowa, but the University of Iowa and Hy-Vee. And this looks like a fairly new Hy-Vee. It's beautiful in here, and what a great day. My goodness, it's looking more like golfing weather. I'm guessing my buddy Steve Hutton over at Geneva Country Club is liking the cloudless skies. Now, if we can just get that temperature from 30, whatever it is, to 60, the Carver family and everybody will be happy here in Muscatine. This is a great hawk town. With all due respect to our brother in Iowa State, Northern Iowa, and Drake, this is a wonderful Iowa community. I used to come over here annually for the Muscatine I Club, which we don't have as many I Clubs as we used to have on the spring banquet tour, but that'll be kicking off. I was in Cedar Rapids yesterday speaking to a great group here in Muscatine. We go to Des Moines Monday for the Polk County I Club football awards dinner with Coach Ferentz and a few select players, and so it's starting. As spring ball winds down, our spring banquet tour, where we love to get out and see the Hawkeye fans around the state. So I'm counting this as part of my beginning, because anytime we're with a great affiliate, radio stations like KWPC, I was listening to the hot country sounds driving over here this morning from that beautiful new hotel downtown, the Merrill. Yeah, so it's great to be back in Muscatine.
The Merrill Hotel voted the best hotel in the state of Iowa.
I didn't know that till you pointed that out last night.
It's a year old. You stayed there last night. It's a great piece for our downtown business community. So give us your firsthand review of the Merrill.
Well, I'd say they're the best cocktail bar in the hotels in the state. I always get off to a good start at the bar. Yeah. No, it's what I like is the new wave look. You know, the modern deco art. The rooms are beautiful. I had a room overlooking the flooded Mississippi River, by the way. And it's just fine that water stays across the street where it's at. But no, Muscatine's, not unlike where I live up in Dubuque, kind of reinvented itself downtown. And a lot of Iowa communities, a lot of cities around the country are doing that because that's what the tourists want to see.
That's exactly
and,
right.
We're taking shorter trips from our homes now. And this is you got the Mississippi River to sell. What else do you need, right? But the Merrill right on the waterfront it's just gorgeous. The bed was nice and soft. The HD, I was able to recap the Masters last night, watching that before I dozed off. And it's a great hotel, it really is.
Great hotel. It's unfortunately, like you said, the riverfront Muscatine generally doesn't come out to Mississippi Drive. We do have a really nice riverfront down there, and so you didn't pick the best time to stay there, but we hope you're back sometime, and it will be fantastic, and we're thrilled to have you here. This event this morning is sponsored by the great people at First National Bank of Muscatine. I want to thank Tony Tone from Hy-Vee and, of course, Jim Simmons. These guys are running a first-rate operation out here. And Dolph, 22 years as voice of the Hawkeyes, 3-time Iowa Sportscaster of the Year. And you've seen it all in your years of Hawkeye lore over the years. I want to mention, let's just get this out of the way, this season, this basketball season, you kind of had a couple of hiccups in the road and really something that true Hawkeye fans, always in your corner, and I understand some things happen, but I know you're chomping at the bit to get back in it here in spring football. Do you care to kind of comment on what happened this year with Hawkeye basketball?
Certainly. I tell people long before this year that, and you know this, you guys know this, Tony knows this, if you're broadcasting a football or a basketball game, it's not scripted. It's impromptu, it's off the cuff. You do your best in preparation. I've always lived by the 3 Ps, pride, passion, and preparation. There are more P words that we could use, but you take pride in what you do, you have passion for what you do, but you also prepare. And then if I were to add a 4th P, it would be perseverance. because you're going to hit some bumps in the road that maybe you don't see coming. And you know, Bobby Hansen and I were having a back in November when I got caught with a live mic. Macy Daly name came floating out. It's similar to conversations that Bobby Hansen and I, Ed Podolak and I have every commercial timeout. We're talking about the flow of the game, and you know, our engineers, for whatever reason, didn't turn off the mic or turn it down. I could hear noise in my headset, so I assumed we were in a commercial break, and thank goodness that it wasn't any worse than that, because sometimes we get a little frustrated. If you can imagine Podolak and Hansen, I tell people that I've got the best job in the world, because I don't know of another Division I play-by-play announcer that has a Super Bowl champion for a football analyst and an NBA champion for a basketball analyst, and both were great players at the University of Iowa. So I was suspended for 2 games off the Macy Daly call-out. And Macy and I, by the way, get along fine. We've aired our, I've aired my apology to him personally. Going to have a face-to-face with him now that the season's over. I'm terribly sorry that he's decided to transfer. It has had nothing to do with what I said on the air, which I would hope Hawk fans understand. So we get through that, and then obviously the reference to Bruno Fernando of Maryland, a marvelous basketball player. I've admired his skills for the 2 years he's been at the University of Maryland. He represents the Big Ten. I love his enthusiasm, the way he plays the game, and he just dominated the Hawkeyes on the offensive glass in that last minute. Was the difference in the game at the end. And so on the post-game wrap-up, I made a reference to, you know, I'm an old Turner movie classic guy. I love the old movies like King Kong, like Superman, like Godzilla. And so I made a reference to Bruno in terms of one of those iconic mythical figures where he just dominated.
Big and powerful.
Yeah,
yep.
Big and strong and powerful. And anybody who knows me understands that growing up in small-town Iowa, I was always taught to respect people regardless of color, race, creed, ethnicity, and knew that there wasn't anything intentional there. And you know, to the university's credit and to Iowa basketball's credit, they agreed with me, but they felt a suspension was proper. I thought the indefinite suspension was a little lengthy, too lengthy, and I argued my case, and in the end I just decided, you know, let's accept it, let's move on. Everybody's on the same page, and that brings us to you know, the rest of the basketball season, which was, as I told Chad Leistokow, the Des Moines Register, the other day, 2 months since this happened. It felt like 2 years. I've never been suspended at any time, let alone twice in a season, twice in 5 months. And so it's just one of those little hiccups, as you call it, potholes in life that we all face, regardless of what job you are employed at. Where, you know, you get a little bit sideways, and you know, people, young guys, young women, I speak to journalism classes all the time, ask me about, you know, how do you get into this industry? I go, well, you work hard at it, you catch a break. If you work hard and you prepare, you will be noticed by employers, whether it's radio stations or banks or whomever. But I said, be prepared for some adversity, because when you're at it for 45 years, like I've been, not every day is going to be a great day or a good day, but today's a good day, and I'll be back on the air with Coach Ferentz April 24th. That's a week from this coming Wednesday for our spring football, kind of our wrap-up show. They're not having a spring game this year due to the construction going on at Kinnick Stadium. They've decided, while that north end zone is being perfected into a phenomenal closure, which will make Kinnick Stadium maybe a third louder, if that's possible.
Wow.
With the new suites and the indoor-outdoor club seats, and then the lower level, the bowl lower level, will be just like it always was at Kinnick Stadium. They've decided to tear the turf up and widen the storm sewer system. The drainage has been an issue, particularly with the wet springs we've endured here in the last decade or two. And when that water runs, there's nowhere for it to go but down the steps and onto the field. And so they're gonna dig down deeper, redo the entire drainage system, and then put brand new field turf down. Obviously, with the winter we've had, that's set all the construction back a little bit.
Right.
But it'll be ready to go by Labor Day weekend when the Hawkeyes host Miami, Ohio.
With that being said, what's the fan reaction been for you? I know you've received tremendous support through all this. I personally thought the suspension was way too long and things like that. But you want to talk about the outreach of the Hawkeye fans all over the place?
It's been incredible. I'm one of those guys that if somebody sends me a letter, I'll respond with a handwritten note. Email, I'll respond with an email, text message. I think I added up a little over 300 text messages, emails, and I don't do social media other than Podolak and Bobby and I have a Twitter page that we respond to Iowa's play from time to time, but I don't do Facebook. My wife is on Facebook, and so we've seen a lot of the fan reaction. What was it? 38,000 signatures on an online petition to
Free Dolph.
Yeah, free Dolph. So there's a bit of comedy in all this too. What do they call it? Tragic comedy, kind of like a Greek mythical play. But I've tried to respond to it. I'm still working back through the list and getting to people. It just the Iowa fan. I think it speaks volumes for just who the Iowa fans are. And many of them in this room this morning. They're passionate about their Hawkeyes, and I've said for 22 years, and I've said it for longer than that. Before I was the voice of the Hawkeyes, is I grew up in this state too, and I grew up listening to Blaine Calkins from Muscatine, to Jim Zabel, Ron Gonder, Bob Brooks, Frosty Mitchell, Gene Clausen. The Hall of Fame list of Iowa broadcasters just goes on and on and on. And in Iowa, because we are an agricultural-based state, people not only love their radios, but they love their AM radios. I tell people I'm still an old AM radio guy, with all due respect to FM, and I was listening to both stations on KWPC this weekend. The farmers that we hear from annually, whether it's in the spring while they're planting or in the fall while they're harvesting, but Iowa people, whether you live in Des Moines, Dubuque, Muscatine, Cedar Rapids, Quad Cities, they are radio born and bred, and that's. And I try to tell fellow play-by-play brethren around the Big Ten, because they know what Iowa means in terms of the Hawkeye Radio Network, and they ask me about it all the time. We were the top, one of the top 5 listened to networks across the country this year. It was, I don't know if it was TuneIn or XM Satellite. Somebody did a survey. I don't think it was Arbitron. And the top 5 listened to radio networks this season, in no particular order, were Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Iowa, and might have been Michigan or Ohio State. I can't remember which, but 3 of the top 5 or 3 of the top 6 were Big Ten schools, and Iowa was in the top 5 consistently. That's of all 130 Division I football schools with radio networks. So I think it speaks volumes for how much Iowa fans value the insight that Podolak brings to the table, and Bobby Hansen brings to the microphone on those cold winter nights in January. And I've always said, whether you're broadcasting football or basketball, my whole approach has always been entertainment, creativity, and obviously informative. Down and distance, time and score. Play-by-play person's primary responsibility is to follow the football, follow the basketball, tell you all who's got it in their hands, and time and score. Third down and whatever. And then I'm smart enough to get it off to the expert, hand it off. Try to get Podolak and Bobby. Basketball, it's a little more difficult because you're back and forth. Football, like baseball, you got 20 seconds between snaps, or 40 seconds. And I grew up doing minor league baseball, which I think baseball prepares you for these sports, because if you can fill a 3.5, 4-hour baseball game with a rain delay maybe thrown in there, you can do football and basketball, trust me. I would tell any young broadcaster, broadcast baseball or girls' high school softball, because it really prepares you for football and basketball. But my approach has always been a simple one. You don't drift too far outside the boundary lines. and when you're trying to get creative and you're trying to compare players to iconic mythical figures, sometimes you kick yourself in the butt and you end up apologizing or getting suspended. And so there's never any malcontent or intention, shall we say. I told Macy Daly, I said, look, I haven't called a kid out on the air in 47 years of doing this. I'm not about to start. I said, the Iowa fan got in the way of what should have been a professional broadcaster. Right. And Macy, I mean, the players, they get ripped apart on social media every day, far worse than what I would ever do. And they get it. They understand. If they're not playing well, they're going to be criticized. If they're playing great, the fans love them, and that's just the society we live in, Brian.
Yes, it is. Let's talk some Hawkeye hoops here. Iowa. Fran McCaffrey just finished his 9th season at Iowa. 23 wins, a successful season. Mm-hmm. Down the stretch, the Hawks faded a little bit. Fan base was walking to the ledge. They were a little worried about it. They revived themselves, beating Cincinnati. Got down big against Tennessee, came back, tied the game, went into overtime, just ran out of gas at the end. Successful basketball season. Do we Hawkeye fans, when it comes to basketball and football, do we have unrealistic expectations for where we think our program should be?
Well, certainly, and that's okay. I mean, all fan bases have unrealistic. How about the Duke fan base? What do you think their expectations are every year, and how do you think they felt when they were knocked up?
I guess I'm talking like, for instance, our last Sweet 16 was what, 99?
Yeah, Dr. Tom Davis last year.
Right.
Yeah, no question that I don't know then that they're unrealistic. I think it's realistic to have a school like Iowa get to a Sweet 16, every 3 or 4 years. I think that's a realistic expectation. Certainly Fran McCaffrey has a higher bar than that. When you look at what Wisconsin has done under Bo Ryan with that style, and they've gotten to, 3 or 4 Final Fours under Bo, or 3, Dick Bennett had him there. Look at Tony Bennett's style. It's all about style, and it's all about you got to have players. You got to recruit players, and that's a good dovetail into Joe Wieskamp, who is just a phenomenal young man, number one, and an incredible talent, number two. What I wanted to see out of Joe, and I'll get back to your realistic expectations from the fan base. What I wanted to see out of Joe this year, other than what I had seen on video, and I think I saw 1 or 2 games in person when he was in high school, was could he defend? Could he defend in the Big Ten? I knew he could rebound. He's got a 7-foot reach at 6'6", whatever he is, but he was an outstanding defender this year as well. His 12 points, 5 rebounds a game are just off the charts for a first-year player, given the level he's playing at. But he can defend. He can poke balls away, passes away, get steals, offensive rebounds. His long arms are even more effective than I thought they'd be. And so when he performs like that, Iowa fans are going, oh boy, is it going to be a fun ride for the next 3 years? Well, hopefully he's around the next 3 years. He may not be. If he has a couple more years or another year like he had this year, the NBA is waiting for Joe Wieskamp. But here's why I mentioned Wisconsin. Michigan State was a good program before Tom Izzo got there. Judd Heathcote had won a national championship, but look what Izzo's done. So it's about style, it's about recruiting players. And in Detroit, or in East Lansing, they've got 100 5-star athletes within an hour drive of Ann Arbor and East Lansing every year. 100 might be a little bit of a stretch. But you look at Detroit, just the Detroit area. We don't have that in Iowa. So Fran and his staff have to fan out all over the country and try and convince kids to come to Iowa. And kids that do come to Iowa, when they visit, they see the Iowa fan base and how passionate they are. They know that it's the only show in town. It's a Hawkeye state, and I'll say that till my dying day. And Iowa State's had an outstanding run for years in basketball. You and I and Ben Jacobson, what can you say about Jake and the job he's done? But it's always going to be a Hawkeye state, and you can twist the numbers any way you want. So no professional teams. University of Iowa, Big Ten exposure like you can't imagine, with the most populated section of the country being in the Midwest and the Mideast. And so it's a great place to come. Great facilities, great academics, great education. So Iowa fans, and I can probably safely say that every Iowa fan gives something financially annually, whether it's pennies or millions of dollars. And so they feel they have an ownership in the program. They take ownership in the program. They buy season tickets. They RV to Kinnick on a beautiful September Saturday. And they expect something in return. They're shareholders in this, and good for them. They should have high expectations, but every school has high expectations.
No doubt. Basketball-wise, Tyler Cook's leaving. Macy Daly's transferring. What do you look for in a Hawkeye program next year? Who's going to step up and fill the shoes of a Tyler Cook, who's one of the most explosive players they've had in recent memory, inside? And you want to talk about some of the fellows. I know Nunji's coming off a redshirt year, and just talk about the outlook with the guys going to fill in some of those roles.
Well, who's going to replace Tyler Cook? Who's going to replace Nicholas Bear? Yep. Let's make sure we add Nicholas Bear in there, because from up the road in Bettendorf, what Nicholas Bear has meant to this program over 4 or 5 years is immeasurable. And I'm not talking about just his basketball skills. I'm talking about his leadership. He was the only true senior this year. And so there's a wealth of talent coming back. You know, one of Fran's problems or issues is that he likes to play a lot of people because of the style, up and down the floor, getting after it, you know, transition baskets, transition defense. So he feels he needs to play a lot of guys. Now, at Siena and Greensboro and Lehigh, he could play 10, 11 guys comfortably. You know, in the Big Ten, given the opposition you go up against night in, night out, it's more logistically sound to settle into that 7 or 8 man rotation. And then if somebody needs a blow, get them out of there. But to lose it, the gifts of Nicholas Bear and Tyler Cook, and Macy Daly, Macy was eating 7 to 8 to 9 minutes a game, maybe 10 at times. Good ball handler, good shooter. So there's 3 guys. Now to the red shirts that you mentioned. Cordell Pemsel, let's start with him because he's similar in size to Tyler Cook. Left-handed, he can score with either hand. He's not as athletic or quick as Tyler. So look for Cordell to be planted down inside where they can get him the ball. You know, he's 6'8", 240 pounds, and really wide. He's thick, so he's physical. And as you know, Cordell doesn't back down from anybody. He'll get right in your face, and that's what I love about Big Ten basketball. Now Nunji, who's added about 20 pounds, is 6'10". He can step out and shoot the 3, or he can play inside as well. Jack's pre-med, extremely smart. Gifted basketball player as well, out of Indiana, 4-star athlete coming out of Indiana a couple years ago. He's got some Iowa. So Pemsel and Jack Nunji would be the first 2 I'd mention. And then the third redshirt is C.J. Frederick, who was the Kentucky High School Player of the Year. That's not easy to do in Kentucky, where they, speaking of expectations. Yes. So now you've got C.J. Frederick, who's a 6'4" shooting wing, a guard. He can play small forward, can play shooting guard. He's got a great touch. I got to see him a lot in practice and just shooting the basketball before games this year. And I can't wait for the fans to see CJ, who went to Covington Catholic, by the way, which has been in the news recently. But Covington Catholic, which is right across the Ohio border, most of their competition was against Cincinnati high schools. So CJ grew up playing a tough brand of basketball. So now you add those 3 guys into the mix with Luka Garza, Ryan Craner. I think the Hawks will continue to be an outstanding rebounding basketball team, even with Tyler Cook gone. Let's not forget Tyler led the team in scoring and rebounding. So who eats those minutes? Who picks up those points and boards? Nunji, Pemsel, Garza, who had another knockout year in his true sophomore year, and Ryan Craner, who really, I thought, emerged this year. Ryan was in better shape. He could run the floor. He could log more minutes, and his production was there. And now you come out on the wing, and of course I haven't mentioned Joe Wieskamp. But I think Tyler leaving gives Joe a more rounded game. He can play three positions. He probably can play four, but you don't want Joe playing power forward because it's easy to get in foul trouble in this league. But Joe Wieskamp can play the point. He can play the shooting guard, which we know he's a great shooter. But I love him at the three spot. So I look for Joe to be, he and CJ to play the 2 and the 3 regularly. Of course, you got Jordan Bohannon. J-Bo will be the leader. He will be the next Nicholas Bear in terms of leadership, in my view. And then coming in, you've got Patrick McCaffrey, who is 6'9", can put it on the deck, can drive it to the rack, and get you baskets, and he can shoot the 3. But Patrick is real thin. He may need a year of redshirting. You got Connor McCaffrey, who I thought had a nice season, spelling Jordan, allowing Jordan to go to that shooting wing or that shooting guard spot, and we saw Jordan produce at some clutch moments. Pick a game. What he did at the end of the Penn State game, the Indiana game, 2 that come to mind, where I think he scored 12 points and 13 points in a matter of like 3 or 4 minutes at clutch moments. That's who Jordan is. Well, you take the Cincinnati game too. That's who Jordan Bohannon is. He's just razor sharp. He's street tough. Love the kid. Love the family. So you got Connor, C.J. Frederick, Joe Wieskamp, Jordan Bohannon on the wing, and now here comes Joe Toussaint, the jet quick point guard from New York City Player of the Year on some polls. True point guard. By that I mean he can put it on the floor and get to the basket. He can go up and dunk it, or he can feed the wings. And Iowa has a number of great shooters. So I'm anxious to see Joe Toussaint. I don't think there'll be any redshirting Joe, at least not in my view. And so you got those 2 outstanding recruits coming in. There'll be some redshirting going on there. I'm sure they're going to be looking at that with Patrick McCaffrey, perhaps somebody else. But I think, again, you've got the depth. Now, how does Fran pare that roster down to the top 7 or 8 or maybe even 9? I really don't see him changing his philosophy a whole lot. I think he's going to play a lot of guys, and I think those guys are capable. They're all gifted.
That being said, do you think with Daly and Cook leaving early, he may look JUCO or grad transfer here in the spring, maybe and bring in one more guy? Or do you think he'll just hold the scholarships for the future?
And I'm only going from experience here, and my conversations with Fran is he's not a big grad transfer guy. It's not that he looks as a one and done as being more disruptive than helpful. If the right guy is there and extremely talented, then yeah, I could see him going grad transfer. JUCO, he hasn't had, the Hawks have not had bad experiences. One that I can think of with junior college transfers. But if there's a Reggie Evans out there that could transfer in and be a rebounder and a putback guy, yeah, I could see that. I guess where I'm going with this is I don't see it happening.
Okay.
But I look at Fran banking those scholarships and luring some outstanding 4-year high school player here in the near future.
Before we shift over to football talk, I threw this out to you last night. I want you to think about this. Gary Dolphin's Mount Rushmore of Hawkeye basketball. We'll just break it down by sport. So if you've got to give me your 4 top all-time Iowa basketball players, I want to know what Gary Dolphin thinks.
You want to know now?
Yeah, I want to know now. And I'll give you one. This will be an easy one for you. This is Ronnie Lester.
Well, no question, Ronnie Lester may be the greatest point guard in the history of Iowa basketball, and that's with one leg. Had his knee, I've had a number of coaches down through the years tell me that if Ronnie Lester doesn't get hurt, Iowa wins the national championship. And that's easy to say. Jess Suttles told me that Sam Oakey didn't break his wrist in 98, 99, that Iowa would have won the national championship because they lacked that rebounding tenacity against UConn, which ultimately won the national championship. But Ronnie Lester, no question. Don Nelson, and again, I've got to go through my lifetime who the Mount Rushmore would be, but Don Nelson from Rock Island would certainly be on that list. He's got 5 or 6 championship rings with the Boston Celtics. Ronnie Lester would be in there. And I'd put Reggie Evans in there, but I'm gonna kind of stick with 4-year players. or 5-year player. B.J. Armstrong, I'd have to put B.J. and Ronnie in the guard court. Roy Marble and Don Nelson at the forward positions. And then, center, boy, we've had so many great centers at Iowa. I always kid Greg Bruner. Greg Bruner is the all-time leading rebounder at Iowa. He's got just under 1,000 career rebounds at 6'6", from Charlie City. Kevin Kunert had 950 rebounds in 3 years. Greg Bruner had 970 in 4 years. Kevin Kunert, who played 12 years in the NBA, had 950 boards in 3 years. Freshmen were not eligible when he played. But, I love great shot blockers. So I'm going to go with A.C. Earl. You asked for 4. I just gave you
Yeah,
the
that's
Mount
fine.
Rushmore.
Give me the starting 5.
But,
That's
but,
fine.
but I'd have to go with A.C.
That's
Earl,
fine.
and I'm sure I'm missing somebody more from the modern era. I'm trying to think in Steve Alford or Dr. Tom's time. God, Eddie Horton was outstanding. That 30-win team at Iowa, you could probably build your Mount Rushmore off that team alone. But I know Bobby Hansen's going to hear about this, and he's going to be upset with me. But as great a shooting guard as Bobby was, I'm going to go with Ronnie Lester and B.J. Armstrong, Don Nelson, Roy Marble, and I'll stick with A.C. Earl. So that'd be my Mount Rushmore would be Nelly and Marble, B.J. and Lester.
Okay.
And then A.C. Earl would be my shot-blocking post player.
Can't go wrong with that team. Got a quick Facebook question before we shift
Sure.
to football, and it is about our young man here from Muscatine, the pride of Muscatine, Joe Wieskamp. It's from Jack Sheese. Wants to know what your opinion is of Joe Wieskamp testing the NBA waters for the evaluation process.
Well, it's a normal process. Yes, sir. Good morning. How are you? You want a poster? Joe Wieskamp, this is something the NBA has married itself to college basketball, where they will, without any commitment, have you come in. I mean, you have to be invited. Freshman, sophomore, senior, doesn't matter, and they will evaluate your skills. NBA scouts, they will tell you your potential now as a freshman. They will tell you what you need to work on going forward. And Joe's already said he's not hiring an agent.
No.
So I mean, he's not NBA ready. He's got all the skills, but good for him. It's an educational process, and he might do it again next year. And you know what? If he has a knockout year next year, boy oh boy, yeah. I mean, he when is a kid NBA ready? Who knows? I mean, it's all about physical skills, mental approach to the game. I mean, I'd like to see Joe stick around all 4 years. I'm partial to Iowa basketball, certainly, but they'll tell you it's not unlike a guy's leaving early for the NFL. Anthony Nelson, Amani Hooker, they'll tell you if you're ready, and also McCaffrey will let him know. Fran has a ton of great NBA contacts. We're very blessed to have Fran Ferentz in those head coaching positions where that is an issue because, Fran's from Philly, Kirk's from Pittsburgh. Kirk coached in the NFL for 6 or 7 years. They have a real keen insight, or they would never let the kids go. They would tell them, no, don't do that. They're going to use you. So I think Joe has got all the skill sets. He's just still growing into that body, both mentally and physically.
Yep. Great answer. Dolph, spring football right around the corner. You said you're going to talk with Coach Ferentz the 24th in your return. You've got a good relationship with the Ferentzes for a long, long time. And talk about the stability of Iowa football. You've had Hayden Fry and Kirk Ferentz since 1979, I believe. That's just incredible, the stability they brought to that program. And if kids commit to the University of Iowa, they know that coach is going to be there pretty much for their tenure. That's been proven.
But three athletic directors, Bump Elliott, Bob Bowlesby, and Gary Barta. Gary, I think, has been there now 11 or 12 years. Two football coaches. And football pays the bills. You know, when you look at it purely from a business standpoint, Iowa has 24 sports that they fund, and football not the only source of net income or net revenue, but football really allows Iowa to do what you've seen in terms of facilities, academic facilities inclusive with the Jardine Learning Center. Football pays a lot of bills, whether that's parking, concessions, ticket sales, TV revenue. Every Big Ten school, this is what I love about the Big Ten, I think it's the most grounded, solid conference by far of the Power Five in America. The Big Ten is for a long time, and other conferences are going to this, they have revenue sharing. So in other words, Rutgers is struggling with its football program right now, yet Iowa, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, and Rutgers each get a check for about $52 million annually. That's just off TV. That's just off the TV network contracts. All 14 Big Ten schools get the same dollar amount. They bowl revenue share. They pool all the bowl money. You take out expenses, and the rest is equally divided among the 14 schools. So the Big Ten is about as fair and equitable a conference as you'll ever find. So three athletic directors, two football coaches, and let's see, what have we had? Maybe half a dozen or seven basketball coaches in that 40. In fact, you can go back 50 years. Bump Elliott, you think about this, Bump Elliott hired Dan Gable, Lute Olson, and Hayden Fry. And Bump's the one who really got it going. Because for those of you old enough in this room to remember, I'm old enough. My first year broadcasting Iowa football, they were 0-11. That was Frank Lauteber's last year, obviously, 1971 or 2. Dan McCarney and Bobby Elliott were on that football team, and I was broadcasting out of Dubuque. And 0-11, there were some long Saturdays. So don't talk to me about how poor 8-4 is, or how bad 7-5 is. I'll take 7-5 and 8-4 every year. And I thought about that 0-11 year when they went 12-0 in 2015 at Nebraska on an icy, wind-blown, 20-degree temperature, wind chill probably about 8 above, and the Hawks kicked the Huskers out in Lincoln. And I'm thinking, man, I've come full cycle from 0-11 to 12-0, But in between those 2 years and the years since have been multiple Big Ten championships, BCS bowl wins, undefeated seasons. It's just been a real joyride for me. Even in the down years, Iowa's always had outstanding players, but because of injuries, because of bad luck, which we all have, maybe it didn't go the way you wanted to, and maybe there wasn't a bowl bid at the end of the rainbow. But when you look at, this is what always irks me, is some Iowa fans just assume that a bowl bid, and I know there's a lot of bowls. Are there too many bowls? I don't know. It's a reward for all the hard work that the players do. They get to go to a nice place, whether it's the Pinstripe Bowl in New York City or the Outback Bowl, which Iowa seems to own in Tampa. It's a treat for the fans who save their vacation time to go on that bowl trip. As Kirk likes to say, there's no such thing as a bad bowl, and there really isn't. And I've been both ends of the country calling bowl games, and every bowl committee, every bowl treats the Hawkeyes with the utmost respect and professionalism. So consistency, whether you're going back to Bump Elliott's time in 1970, Bump's 92 now, I think, 92 or 93, and living in an assisted home in Iowa City. He got to a couple games this year, but obviously when you're 92 or 3, your health is going to be failing a little bit. But he was the architect, and I asked him, when he hired Hayden Fry, nobody knew who Hayden Fry was. The old hick from North Texas. And I said to Bump Elliott, I'll never forget, I was in TV then, I said, Bump, who is this guy? I said, what I didn't say it that way. I said, why did you hire Hayden Fry? And Bump's remark was, his first remark was, well, he said, this guy better win, or he said, you won't see me around here, because he had hired Lauterbur and Bob Cummings.
Yeah.
Bob Cummings did a pretty good job considering he came from high school.
Right.
But he knew that Hayden was the trifecta for him. If Hayden didn't get it done, then Iowa would probably have a new athletic director. Well, Hayden Fry changed everything at the he and Lute Olson changed everything at the University of Iowa, really put them on the national map. Again, you'd have to go back to the Evashevsky days and the Ralph Miller days of the 50s and 60s to find Iowa getting that kind of national exposure. But Bump was the guy that really changed it. Bowlesby picked up the baton and ran with it. And then obviously Kirk Ferentz has done a phenomenal job. Dr. Tom Davis. I mean, Iowa's had great coaches, not only in football and basketball, but of course Gable, Tom Brands, present day, and gymnastics. Pick a sport. They've had great runs through mostly all 24 of them.
This year's Hawkeye football team, expectations, I think, should be fairly high. You got Nate Stanley coming back. He'll be a 3-year starter. The Big Ten West, I think, is up for grabs. They've got some holes to fill, Dolph. On the defensive line, of course, they're losing the best 2 tight ends in America from last year, Noah Fant and T.J. Hawkinson. But I think the pieces are in place for Iowa to have a pretty competitive season. And I really do think that they should be able to contend in the Big Ten West. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, let's plug First National Bank for sponsoring our show today.
As always.
We appreciate the great First
Bring out
National
the old
Bank.
Cash.
We've
The cash advertisement that was signed years ago.
We got First National Bank employees here today, so let's give them a shout out.
Scott Ingstead.
Scott's here.
Scott, give a wave. There you go.
President of First National Bank.
That's right.
By the way. We had a great time with Coach and Scott last night. Chuck
Van Heck is here.
Yeah, Chuck. I've got a lot of good friends in Muscatine. Mary Gedkin, who's an English teacher at Muscatine High School. She's a Dubuque native, great basketball player. Of course, Steve Hutton. I've known Steve at Geneva Country Club for a lot of years, known his family, knew his dad very well, Skip. So, yeah, it's great to have everybody here this morning. Well, football, what I've been watching in spring practice, and I've been to a couple of live practices, went down to their pro day, and then I've watched a lot of video of spring ball. That you're allowed 15 practices during the spring. It's spread out over a month's time. So the Hawks have been going 3 days a week, 2 to 3 days a week in practice, and they'll conclude with practices. I think next week wraps it up, or in 2 weeks, excuse me. That said, I'm looking at the void left by the 2 tight ends and the defensive line. Parker Hesse, Matt Nelson, Anthony Nelson, all graduated. Well, Matt and Parker graduated. Anthony, of course, leaving a year early for the NFL. And then obviously Noah Fant, T.J. Hawkinson, everybody wants to talk about who's going to replace them at tight end. Well, present day, right now, if the season started tomorrow, and thankfully it doesn't, because they've got time to work through the bumps yet, you would see Nate Wheating and Sean Byer out there. Sean Byer has the most athleticism, built more so skill-wise like T.J. Hawkinson than Noah Fant. But Sean Byer, a great high school player at Cedar Rapids Kennedy, and everybody remembers Sean for backing into the punt down the field last year at Kinnick, which led to was that the Wisconsin game, as I remember.
Yep.
And the kid was just beside himself. Logan Lee, who's not from too far away here across the river, up the river a little bit, in Orion. Is it Orion or
Orion.
Orion? Excuse
Yep.
me, Orion, Illinois. And then I know Coach Ferentz is really excited about Logan. And then a kid, here's a name for you, Joseph Miamin. The Big Ten starts, they'll be hitting on all cylinders, and I fully expect that to happen. Now, to the defensive line, I'm feeling a lot better than I did after the football banquet when I saw Parker Hesse and Anthony Nelson. The rumor was that Anthony would leave then, and that came to be. And Matt Nelson, who really developed into a stalwart defensive tackle and run stopper. Well, you start with A.J. Epinesa, who will be an All-American. I mean, here's a kid that played on third down and rush downs last year, maybe half the snaps, and led the Big Ten in sacks. He had 10 and a half sacks, playing part-time. So A.J., as good as advertised when he came here from Edwardsville, he'll be the linchpin of that defensive line. On the other side, you got Lattimore, Golston, two young studs from Detroit who had a phenomenal bowl game against Mississippi State. So you'll see Cedric, you'll see Golston and Lattimore playing a lot on the opposite side of A.J. Golston can jump inside and play tackle. And then Davion Nixon. Now here's a young guy that we've been waiting to see for a couple years. Didn't qualify academically when he came out of high school in Wisconsin 2 years ago. So they parked him at Iowa Western Community College in Clarinda. He had an All-American JUCO year this past year. He is a behemoth. He's 6'3", about 330 pounds, cat quick, and he has looked really good in practice. This year's Sam Brinks, perhaps, who graduated, will be, I think, Riley Reif's younger brother, Brady. Brady Reif has looked terrific. And then two brand new kids that have jumped off the page at me, Noah Shannon and Jaden McDonald. Now, Jaden McDonald reminds me a little bit of what Norm Parker described Matt Roth years ago. Matt Roth ultimately became an All-American defensive tackle. When I asked, and he came to Iowa as a linebacker, and they put him inside. They started defensive end. Of course, they could move him around. Matt ended up playing 7 or 8 years in the NFL. I said, Norm, what do you like about Matt Roth? And he said, well, he is unbelievably quick at getting to the quarterback. The problem is he runs right by the quarterback. He said, now, if we can get him to go tackle the quarterback when he gets there, and Matt would just fire off the line of scrimmage. And Jaden McDonald is like that. But you're going to love the kid. He is lightning quick. They can stand him up or put his hand on the ground. So I think we're going to be okay on that defensive line. You know, and I've said this for 2 years, Iowa has really recruited well on the defensive side of the football, especially in the secondary and in the down linemen. On the back end, where you lose those two great safeties, Jake Gervais and Amani Hooker, Gervais from right up the road, Port Assumption. Amani, of course, came here from Minneapolis, turned into an all Big Ten safety. Geno Stone will jump in there and be the monster back, as I like to call him, or the nickel back, or that fifth defensive back. You see Iowa play a lot of 4-2-5 defense. That worked extremely well the second half of the season, and certainly against Mississippi State in the bowl game, where they got two big interceptions at crunch time in that second half. So you're going to see Ojemudia and Geno Stone playing a lot more. They've got a great young corner in DJ Johnston coming in. I think the Hawks will be just fine. They played two freshmen a lot last year, a kid out of Des Moines and a kid from Florida. So I think the secondary, young, raw, but extremely talented, very athletic, very fast. So that brings us to linebacker, where you've got Nick Neiman, Christian Welch, Jaimin Colbert, all three young guys who are big, 6'2" or 3", 230 pounds, can run. They'll be just fine. I look at them to play more two linebackers, 5 defensive backs. But Jaimin Colbert is an example. He could play both strong safety and defensive end. He's that athletic. So Phil Parker has never disappointed over 11, 12 games when it comes to good defense. And I think Iowa will hold serve on defense. It's up to Nate Stanley and the running game. The running game needs to get better. The wide receivers, you got another year of Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset, who, along with Nick Easley, were the difference makers in that bowl game. When's the last time that we talked about the Iowa wide receivers winning a bowl game? The tight ends and the running backs. So it's great young receivers arrive, and I think they're poised for a tremendous season. And then a young guy that who's going to take Nick Easley's spot, who took Matt Vandenberg's spot. There's a young guy from New England named Nico Reganey, who's got all the speed in the world, and he's looked really good in spring ball. So those are some of my thoughts. They brought in a grad transfer punter from Arizona State, kid from Australia, who averaged about 44 yards a punt in the Pac-12 last year. What I like is he on average had a 4.7 to 4.8 second hang time. And, you know, when you're punting the ball, it's all about field position. When you can hang it up there for almost 5 seconds, they got no chance to return on Iowa's cover team. So that's where I see Iowa football right now here in April.
Fantastic. Folks, we're broadcasting live, Hy-Vee Muscatine Market Grill Express. Brian Musell with the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin. It's great to have Gary out here coming to Muscatine and really talking about Hawkeye sports. This is great. This event is sponsored by First National Bank of Muscatine. And Dolph, going to hit you. If anybody out here has a question for Dolph, just come on up and ask it, and we'll talk about it. Don't be shy. If there's a question for Gary Dolphin about anything related to Hawkeyes, come on up. In the meantime, going to hit you with the same football question I asked you with basketball. It's kind of hard to pick 4 because there's so many football players, but give me your top 5 all-time Hawkeye football players.
Mount Rushmore of Iowa football?
+1. I'll let you name 5.
Okay.
That broadens it.
Well, you got to start with arguably the greatest player in the history of Iowa football, what he meant to Iowa football, Niall Kinnick. You know, not many guys have a stadium named after him, so
Chuck's got a building named after him.
Really?
Yeah, Coach
Chuck
Van Heck.
does?
Chuck Van Heck's
Well,
got
he
a building
should, Chuck.
town.
He's big time.
He is
I
big
found
time.
that out at
He is
dinner
big
last
time.
night.
Yeah.
He's I met the mayor.
Yeah.
I met Chuck. I met the gang at First National Bank. So I feel I can go home a happy man. And I met most everybody from the radio station. But, well, my Mount Rushmore, boy, yeah, you're right. When you play 22 in a game, it's hard to. Again, I'll stick primarily with my 22 years of calling Iowa football. Well, maybe a couple guys out of the 80s, but boy, I should give you 2 defensive players and 2 offensive players. So I'd go with Niall Kinnick and should I say Ed Podolak? Pody.
Well, did he slip Eddie Cash? Or maybe.
No, Edward.
No.
He'll buy, but he won't give you cash. Unlike Zabel.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Now I'd have to go with Niall Kinnick and Chuck Long. Those would be if I'm forced to pick two players. That'd be my two offensive players. Two defensive players. I'd have to put Larry Station. To me, one of the great middle linebackers of all time at the University of Iowa. Larry Station and I guess Niall Kinnick played both ways, didn't he? So I could use him both offensively and defensively. But I'll go with Larry Station, and I should pick Andre Tippett, but I'll go with Adrian Claiborne. With the fifth player being Pat Anger. And part of that is maybe my favorite personalities of Iowa football. Many of you will remember the last play of the game at Michigan State when Ricky Stanzi hit Marvin McNutt on the quick slant. No timeouts left. 4th and goal at the 7, and Iowa won the game on the last play of the game, 15-13, over an outstanding Michigan State team. So Pat Anger, Bentendorf's finest, had a great game, had an All-American game of which he was. And so we had him as our star of the game. And we got a headset in the locker room the guys can put on. And so we're Podolak and I are interviewing Anger up in East Lansing, and everybody's yelling and screaming in the background in the locker room. And so I come up with this brilliant question. Pat's a prankster now. He's a trick artist. I said, Pat, I'm hearing all that noise and laughter and camaraderie in the locker room. Describe that locker room for us, would you? Now, we've got 200,000 people listening in any 15 to 30-minute window on the Iowa Hawkeye Radio Network. And, of course, we're on XM satellite now, so it's going nationwide. Anger, deadpans. Well, Dolph, as I look around, I see a lot of naked guys walking around the locker room. And Podolak just lost it. I said, well, that's Pat Anger, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Pat. I think we'll wrap it up on that note, that visual. That's who Pat Anger was, and that's who Pat Anger is today. In fact, I think he's in banking, too, if I'm not mistaken. All of us end up in banking.
There's a trend here.
Yeah. Save your pennies. But I brought some posters, by the way, some football and basketball posters. If anybody would like to take one with them here in Muscatine, feel free to come on up. But so that'd be my top five. Marshall Yonda, Robert Gallery, Brendan Sheriff. We didn't even mention the 3 Outland Trophy winners. Cal Jones,
Paul Krause,
Carl Noonan, Gary Snook. There are a lot of great football players at Iowa down through the years. The next time I come back, I'll think of the greatest player, in my view, at each position group. How's that? So that'd be D-line, linebacker, secondary, and O-line. But you look at a guy like Marshall Yonda, who is entering his, 13th season with the Baltimore Ravens. He may have thrown the most crushing crackback block I've ever seen at Iowa on a Michigan State defensive back. Now, Marshall Yonda is 6'4", 330 pounds, and he was running with they swept wide side. He reversed back on a reverse play to the slot receiver, and a Michigan State defender was coming across the line of scrimmage going after the running back and never saw Marshall Yonda coming. And he knocked him into, I think, Mahaska County from Kinnick Stadium. And the poor kid, thankfully he was okay, but that's who Marshall Yonda is, a kid that grew up in Iowa, like Robert Gallery, like Brendan Sheriff, small-town Iowa, Anamosa, and wanted to be a Hawk. And Marshall Yonda is a classic example of a kid, a young guy who didn't like school, didn't like the academic side, languished in junior college, was just going to give the game up, and there's something that Kirk Ferentz saw in him, and not only convinced him to get his academics in order, but to come to the University of Iowa and play for 2 seasons, which he did, developed into an All-American player, and now he'll be a first ballot Hall of Fame NFL inductee. The NFL scouts that I talk to, that I know, say he will go into the NFL Hall of Fame as perhaps the greatest guard ever to play in the National Football League. That's just another example of an Iowa kid that figured it out. We all figure out life, at different stages, at different ages. But if you're from Iowa, you typically figure it out sooner than later, and that's why Marshall Yonda loves the University of Iowa. That's why he comes back every spring. He's down there now lifting and working out every day with Chris Doyle. Can you imagine we've gone an hour and not mentioned Chris Doyle once?
Yes,
his son, by the way, Dylan Doyle, will play a lot at linebacker this year. He's got a little bit of his dad's attitude, which I love.
Well, in Anamosa, Iowa, Marshall Yonda, like you said, that's small town Iowa. Chris Doyle, I was just reading 15 former Hawks come back home to train in the offseason. They're in the NFL because of Chris Doyle, the University of Iowa. And I know Marshall's got a locker still there. Chris talked about it, that he comes back, and he made the comment he still wears his Pro Bowl cleats from his first Pro Bowl. He wears them when he comes back to work out in the off season because he wants to be reminded every day he works out of what it took him to get there the first time. That's the drive he has.
Guys like Marshall Yonda and Robert Gallery and Chuck Long and Ronnie Harmon and Matt Rogers off the 90, Brett Bielema. I could go on and on and on. My mind isn't what it used to be, but those guys are the reason that we have a $70 million indoor practice facility at the University of Iowa, and it's much more than a practice facility. 2 brand new outdoor practice fields right next to the practice facility. Hayden Fry built the bubble. Kirk Ferentz, his legacy, other than great football, will be, and professionally done, will be the Hanson Performance Center. They call it Football Performance Center at the University of Iowa, and you should all walk in that front door and look at the trophies and the welcoming center of that football facility. You can't get into all nooks and crannies. You can with an organized tour, certainly. But Iowa went from the smallest weight room, strength and conditioning. You think what Chris Doyle did before he had this facility. They had a 1,200 square foot weight room. They got a 12,000 square foot weight room now. They went from the smallest weight room in the Big Ten to the biggest, largest, most modern, and well-equipped weight room. And that's all due to Marshall Yonda, to Robert Gallery, to Brendan Sheriff, to all the great legacy players, all the great football players at Iowa that preceded the present-day kids, and they understand it. They're taught from the day they step in there why that performance center is the way it is. It's because of the guys that are in the NFL right now and the guys that have played there over the last 40 years.
Fantastic. Any fans with a question for Dolph, come on up and ask it.
Hello, I just wanted to ask a question about your memories of watching George Kittle play. Now he's playing, of course, for the 49ers.
Tight end you. Yeah, thank you. The question was about George Kittle. And I've heard this criticism of Iowa football where George Kittle's concerned, how can this kid go to being the NFL record setter for yardage in his second or third year? He obviously was used wrong at Iowa. No, he wasn't used wrong at Iowa. The NFL is a throw the football league. You don't see as many great running backs in the NFL as you did maybe in Walter Payton's day or Paul Hornung or Jimmy Taylor's day when it was 3 yards in a cloud of dust like Woody Hayes coined. But now it's everything's a spread in the National Football League. Every team wants to be like each other. They want to throw the football. And so tight ends are more hybrid in the NFL. See Rob Gronkowski, see Kelsey, see George Kittle. But George had the best foundation, like all the tight ends do at Iowa. Hayden, there's still a misnomer out there that Iowa stands their tight ends up. Iowa does not stand their tight ends up. They'll send them in motion a lot. Hayden Fry, patterned that, the stand-up tight ends. Kirk Ferentz still runs a lot of what Hayden did, but he wants his guys blocking more. And George Kittle had the best of both worlds in that regard. George Kittle came to Iowa without a position. I mean, they weren't sure where they were going to play him, maybe at wide receiver, maybe at defensive end, maybe at linebacker, kind of like Chad Greenway. And he ends up at tight end. And about the time he was leaving Iowa, he really figured it out. And he was productive at Iowa. It's just that Kirk likes to be, he'd love to be 50-50 balance, run to throw. That isn't the way they play the game of the National Football League. And then George obviously exploded this past year. He's always had great hands. He's always had wonderful legs. He can run like a slot receiver, a wide receiver, and they split George out a lot, as you remember, just like they did Noah Fant this past year. So the fact that Iowa uses their tight ends the way they do is why George Kittle is so doggone productive in the National Football League. Here's the other component. George was injured a lot at Iowa. Bad ankle that lingered, bad shoulder. He was beat up a lot because he really hadn't grown into that body. Now he's 250 pounds. He can still run. He's always had great hands, and he is fearless running across the middle. And that's why the 49ers love him, and you'll see him, again, health permitting, you'll see him as an all-pro tight end often going forward. Every year I kind of refresh my memory as to all the great tight ends at the University of Iowa. And I thought of another one the other day, Jonathan Hayes.
Yep.
I'd forgotten about Jonathan. Yep. Help yourself, young man. Got a young lad up here. He wants a football poster. You don't have any questions for me? Oh, you bet. It's been great to be here. I mean, I've talked nonstop for an hour, so I hope we don't have too many questions.
Would you like Gary to sign that for him? You can sign
I'd be happy to sign it for him.
Yeah.
So, George, and he loves the Hawkeyes. I saw him at the Big Ten basketball tournament. He's in the crowd. He just got married, as a matter of fact, to Claire Till, who is an outstanding basketball player at Iowa. And George, he's going to make a lot of money, and he's going to woo a lot of 49er fans across the country going forward. If I'm the 49ers, I'm ripping that rookie contract up and signing him to a long-term extension, Mr. Musell. Maverick? Yeah. That's a tight end name. Maverick. That's a tight end name.
Yes. You might want to share, right after you sign that, your favorite Drake Kulik story, if you have one.
Well, Drake's,
that we can talk about.
Drake's making more headlines now than he ever did at Iowa. I've heard their podcast a couple times. I'm told that he. I'm told. No. I love Drake Kulik.
Yeah.
I'm told that he wants me on his podcast. I think I've been suspended enough for 1 year. I'm not sure if I want to be on Drake's podcast or not, but no, I'd be happy to go on a show. Yes, sir.
I got an opinion.
You got an opinion? Every Hawkeye fan has an opinion.
I don't think Tyler Cook will ever make it in pro basketball.
Okay.
My second question is, I'm an ardent basketball fan.
Uh-huh.
And why is it that we can't play defense in Iowa? Is it because we're slow of foot?
Why is it we can't play defense at Iowa in terms of basketball you're talking about? Well, the Hawks played a lot better defense this year than they did in that 14 and 19 season because they played, Fran likes to play man-to-man. He's going to guard you man-to-man, but they went to more zone defense this year, and that really helped them. Now they wore down a little bit over 35 games, and their defense struggled at times at the end of the season. But the defense got them back into the game against Cincinnati, and it got them back into the game against Tennessee.
The best defense I've seen was that team from the Big Eight in the semifinals.
Texas Tech, you refer to. You're dating yourself. You said the Big Eight.
And one more thing.
Okay, sir. What's your name?
Robert McFadden.
Hi, Robert. Nice to meet you. Robert McFadden. That's a good Irishman.
For 40 years.
Well, thank you. Thank you for. You're never too old.
It's just defense is so important.
Defense wins championships. That's still true. Now you're wearing a United States Navy. Were you in the Navy?
Yes, I was.
Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you, Bob. You take care. Bob's got a regular table over here of supporters.
Yes,
I can see that at Hy-Vee.
Yep.
What a great atmosphere this is here this morning.
Fantastic.
Brian.
Folks at Hy-Vee are top shelf. Tony Tone, Jim Simmons out here, the store director. Any other questions for Gary Dolphin, voice of the Hawkeyes?
We might have to make this an annual get-together.
We can do that. We can do that.
Well, I want to thank First National Bank for its sponsorship, obviously, and Cash.
Cash.
And you guys.
I love that old Cash.
Yes. and to all the great Hawk fans who have come out here this morning. I'm going to be hanging around till 10 o'clock.
That's right. We're going to conclude our live broadcast here, and want to thank the great people at
That's good because
KWPC,
I need to
860
visit the
AM.
men's room.
Yeah.
The Starbucks coffee at Hy-Vee is
Yeah.
terrific.
So I want to thank, of course, we're going to sign off from KWPC, 860 AM and 95.1 FM, and Facebook Live page on the Voice of Muscatine. Want to thank Gary Dolphin live. It's been fantastic. Dolph's going to hang around till 10 if somebody wants to stop by, ask him a question. He's got some posters to sign. And folks, give it up for Gary Dolphin stopping by
Thank you.
today, visiting Muscatine. It's been a thrill to have
Thank
you
you all.
here.
Brian, thank you. Thank you, and thanks to Tony and your wonderful engineering staff here for keeping us on the air.
I want to mention Alex, Chris, and Jordan is not here at the moment, but those guys did a great job setting all this up for the radio station to get us going here today. And it's just been a thrill to have you in town. You stayed at the Merrill. You talked about that earlier. Great hotel, downtown Muscatine. And just thrilled to have you here.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
It's great. And thanks to everybody for listening in on our I should mention we have 45 radio stations on the Hawkeye Radio Network, and Muscatine, you guys at KWPC have been a great affiliate for a lot of years. And every time I come to Muscatine, I think of Murray Weir. I probably should have just put him on the basketball team and be done with it. The only Hawkeye to ever, do you know Murray Weir? Who knows what Murray Weir did at the University of Iowa? He's a consensus All-American.
Right.
The only Hawkeye, unless it was I don't think Andre Woolridge led the Big Ten, but Murray Weir led the nation in scoring during his career at the University of Iowa. I think, if I remember correctly, the only Hawkeye ever to lead the country in scoring, and I forget what his average was. In those days, they didn't have the three-point line, and they didn't racehorse fast break basketball like they do today. But Murray Weir, not only a Hall of Fame player, but a Hall of Fame coach, and he's from your community of Muscatine. So I'm a big history guy, as you can tell.
You're right.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah, I need a couple of them. My son lives in